Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery and addiction topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The views expressed here are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Hey there, welcome back to Recovery Sort Of. I'm a guy in long-term recovery named Jason.
And my name's Billy. I'm also a person in long-term recovery.
And we definitely wanted to just take a moment at the beginning of this episode to thank everybody who listens. I know we do this for us in general, and we always kind of hoped some people would listen, but I don't know that I can express the right way how cool it is when people listen and then give feedback, and then there's like more to think about it. It really keeps me going through the whole week. Like, we talk about it for an hour and kind of hash it out, and then there's these other one or two ideas that come in, and I'm like, that's some interesting shit. And I'm having side conversations with people, and so we appreciate everybody that listens and takes the time. I know there's a crunch for time in the world. It's a lot going on, and so if you're taking an hour or more usually out of your week to listen, we really appreciate that. One of the cool things I noticed this week is that for the first time, our overall listenership is larger in a different state than Maryland. And me, that was like, we made it, right? We're not just a local show anymore.
Yeah, right. It's not just our friends.
Right, exactly. So I was like, that's cool. It's California, so apparently we have somebody in Oakland that streams the shit out of us. So hi, Oakland. Thanks for listening.
Hey, shout out to Oakland.
Yeah. And just in line with people who listen, back to Selena giving us the idea for the topic we did last week. I want to thank her again for that. And Sylvia for coming on. She was the absolute perfect guest for that show, I think. It went so well.
Yeah, it was really good. Thank you. Again, same thank you to everyone who listened. Thanks, Sylvia, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. All the feedback I've gotten, Amber on Twitter said she really appreciated Sylvia's insight, especially, discerning that the fellowship and the group are different, because she was kind of struggling with an issue she had with some things going on. And another listener, Julie, really appreciated the take that Sylvia had. And she said that Sylvia was just really easy to listen to. She's like, a lot of people seem more frustrated, and it's harder for her to not get defensive instantly about it. But Sylvia was just kind of so laid back and easy to listen to about it. It allowed her to have the information sink in.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in talking to her, and she explained it a little bit on there, but that is one of the things she's learned as being a black woman, is how to tone that down so that people don't tune out or turn her off or get defensive back. I don't know if you caught that when she described that as talking in like an area service meeting, and you get loud, and then it's easy to dismiss people or blow them off. Like, oh, she's just an angry black person,
right.
Where she's worked really hard to not be that. And, it's sad in a little bit of a way.
I know. I didn't know how. I'm appreciating that people got it. And then there's also a part of me that's like, I'm not allowed to tell people how to express themselves and they're angry once they're angry, right? Like,
right.
It's like whipping my son for 20 years, and then, when he's mad about it and comes to shoot me, telling him he's not allowed to be, he should have came civilly and told me nicely about it or something. Like, I just don't get that option, I guess. But whatever it takes to get the message out, I think is what happens. And thankfully, Sylvia had the message that a lot of people have been able to hear and gotten something out of. Yeah,
she's an awesome person in recovery. She's been around, this area for a long time, and she has a lot to offer. So
Awesome. So going back, we didn't get to talk much because that episode just kind of cut right to the chase. We didn't get to talk much about the comments about Step 9. We had a few of those. Sobriety Matt, our buddy on Twitter, had posted the episode and asked for some ideas about what people do with their Step 9. And so Recovery Man said, not to make an amend that hurts anyone, including yourself. Your higher power doesn't want you mangled in the process of the steps. There may be uncomfortable amends, but nothing you can't handle. And, I don't remember. God, it's been 2 weeks. I don't remember yesterday, really. But I don't remember if we said exactly not to hurt yourself or not. But I do think that's important. I know we kind of keyed in on the fact that, like, the process was really about you. It's not about whether these other people get healed, even though that's the goal. The real process is about, like, me being at peace with myself at the end of the day. But yeah, I don't want to be, go into the steps and come out worse off.
Yeah, that's for sure. I don't want to cause, I don't want to cause harm to myself,
Right.
like that's part of the step, ourselves or others, and again, I think that's where a sponsor can help us work through some of that, give us a different perspective.
Yeah, that's got to get really tricky, though, with some of the legal things we might be in trouble for, or people I know who don't want to turn themselves in, or this, that, and the other. Like, where's the line of what's harming myself and what's dealing with the wreckage of my past properly? And that's got to get really tricky. I can only imagine there's people out there who've made some amends that ended up not being so fun for them, at least. I don't know if it hurt them or not, but...
Yeah. Well, and there is a balance there, too. I mean, obviously, if I have to make a financial amends and, it's a little painful to give up that money, but,
Right.
And it might create a little bit of a crunch in my lifestyle, but I should still do it, so...
Yeah, it's tricky. Another person, Crosstalk Recovery, said, some of the amends end up being, I'm sorry, even though I still have a resentment against you. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know. Can you really make an amends properly, the ideal way, if you're still holding a resentment? Is that even doable? I guess you could live the amends process a little.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally just look at any sort of resentment, like, I've always looked at resentments as a failing on my part, So if I'm hanging on to a resentment, I'm trying to work that out, like, for a completely different reason than a ninth step, but
right.
I don't, like, to me, these resentments are like a luxury that I can't afford, like hanging out in a bar or, self-pity. Like, even when I deserve self-pity, it's just not a luxury that I can afford myself too long, because as an addict, then it's, oh, poor me and look at me and I deserve, and I start justifying and rationalizing unhealthy behavior.
Right.
And resentments can be the same way, even when they're justified. Like, I have to, for myself, it's important that I practice forgiveness, and try to get over that resentment, because I put myself in a bad situation.
Yeah, that whole swallowing poison, waiting for somebody else to die thing always hit home with me. It's like, man, that is the perfect analogy, right? I'm the one tore up inside over the resentment. They're all free, living, happy, joyous, and peaceful, and I'm miserable over something that happened.
And I think there's some sort of, I would say, nuances between, like, what you consider a resentment. Like, okay, so, I've had some issues in my life where people hurt me or caused harm to me, and I've forgiven those people, but I don't carry a resentment, as in, like, I don't harbor up a bunch of anger and hatred when I think about those people anymore. But at the same time, I don't maintain relationships with them, or I don't, like, let them off the hook for what they did wrong, or put myself back in the same situation to be harmed again. You know what I mean? But
Right.
But I don't think holding someone accountable for a harm that they caused is a resentment. To me, they're different things.
So, and I've always considered a resentment just like an anger at a past issue with an individual, excuse me, or a situation. But I think our particular program defines it a little differently, which is interesting to me. It always has been. It talks about a resentment as reliving a past situation over and over again. And I'm like, is that really what a resentment is? Because shit, I resent things that aren't terrible or weren't done to me.
Well, and I put a little bit of I'll call it a caveat, or maybe it's in there too, is that it's the reliving of the past experience, but then feeling the same feelings all over again. So that part of it's really important. It's not that I just remember or think about a situation that happened, but it's that I feel those same feelings, whether it's guilt, shame, embarrassment, whatever it was. Somebody embarrassed me in 7th grade by pushing me down on the playground and spitting on me or whatever. It's like, yeah, I can feel like, oh, that sucked, that was a terrible thing. But if I'm sitting alone, I start thinking about that and get overwhelmed with shame again. It's like, dude, that was 30 years,
Right.
Why do I still feel that shame down to my core? That's where the resentment is for me.
My buddy says you got to go find him as an adult and beat him up.
And then the shame will go away.
And you feel better.
Oh.
Apparently. I don't know if that works.
Then I just have double shame.
Right. I just feel adult shame. George C. said, rigorously examine your motives. Is the amend intended to honestly correct former wrongs, or is it to make you feel better at the expense of the amendee? Is it ego-driven, like check out, clean me? And he said he got a lot of that badly the first time and had to re-examine his motivation, which I think is, how most of our lessons get learned.
Right.
But yeah, I think we definitely talked about that. The motive is crucial. I know a buddy of mine, Jack, always talks about the motive might even be more important than the action. And I always found that to be an interesting statement. And I want to argue with him about it every time he says it. Because I'm like, well, no, if I'm just doing the right thing, it doesn't matter why I do it. And he's like, no, you got to be doing it for the right reason. And I'm like, well, do I do the right thing for the wrong reason? Or do I do the wrong thing for the right reason? Like, that seems to me obvious. You do the right thing, right? Even if you don't have the right reasoning behind it. It'd be better than doing the wrong thing because you want to.
Yeah, that's tough. I wrestle with that myself a lot, just in my daily life. Obviously, there's a lot of things as a parent, as a married person, as a, responsible employee that's like, I really don't want to fucking do this right now. You know what I mean? But I do it because it's the right thing to do. And my motivation's probably like, I just don't feel like being bitched at. I don't feel like, I don't feel like hearing it later. So I'm just going to do this now.
Right. Oh, man. And then
we talk about in recovery, you're judged by your actions, not by your thoughts. So
right.
Who cares if I do the right action?
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, look, it's better that I don't rob this bank only because, some horrible wrong reason, I don't know what, than it is that I do rob the bank because, I want to. Like
right.
I don't know. I just can't get down with it. But he says it, and I don't. I love his recovery and his information, so I don't doubt it. I just always want to argue with it because I'm not sure.
It's probably like most of these lessons. It's like there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all in life. In certain situations, you're just supposed to do the right action despite your motives. And in other situations, the motives are really important, as in this amends thing. Like it is really important that we keep track of what our motivation is in our amends. Like It is really important that we remember, no, it isn't just about going and saying I'm sorry. It's about, honoring the pain and the harm that you cause to other people.
Well, on the other side of that, we talk about you can't think your way into better living. You got to live your way into better thinking. So if I sit around and wait on this right reasoning to do things, I'll never do them, according to that statement, right? Like I have to do the right thing for the wrong reasons first, repeatedly, and then eventually, hopefully, I'll be doing the right thing for the right reason.
Yeah. Wasn't that fake it till you make it? Isn't that?
Yeah, that's definitely what I got to do. It's interesting. I had this conversation with somebody recently because I just don't feel like doing stuff a lot of times, right? And so ultimately, my life is set up right now where I can kind of get away with that frequently, right? I can frequently choose to do the, so-called lazy thing or the thing that feels better right now, even though I don't really feel better later. And they're like, well, do you think you're going to just feel motivated one day and then start doing things? Is that what you're waiting on? And they asked it real, nicely. And I was like, these motherfuckers got me, right?
Right.
Because I know that's not true. I know from, talking to people who struggle with depression that generally you're not just going to be not depressed one day and then you go out and go to parties and whatever, go shopping. You have to kind of force yourself at some point. And no, that doesn't mean if you're depressed that you need to go force yourself to do anything. I get it. There's a level of seeking the right professional help to help you start being motivated. And possibly that includes medication, which is interesting because we're going to get to that later in this episode. And so through taking these steps with professionals, you can find a way to find these little bits of motivation. But there are times you need to kind of push through a little bit, right? I'm not saying depressed people are lazy. Please understand me clearly here. I get it. That's not the case. But it was the same thing with my situation. It was like, fuck, man, they got me. I'm not just going to feel better one day. I need to start pushing myself here and there to do this shit I don't feel like doing now so that I feel better later on. And that inspired me to, leave my house and not attend my home group virtually last night. I actually went in person because of that damn statement. So,
but see, that's where I think the program is important, that we develop, a support group or a network of people that are gonna, that we be open-minded and we're looking for solutions outside of ourselves. It's that self-centeredness that gets me into trouble, that me living in my own head thinking I don't, I got it all figured out. And I tell myself bad shit all the time, bad information, and it sounds really smart at the time. It sounds really good. It's
right.
I'm smart. I know what I'm talking about. I've researched this before, and I don't realize that I'm setting myself up for a trap.
Right. The last one was Sandra. The first person she had to forgive and make amends to was herself. No way could she start until then, and that required a solid 6 and 7. And she said she did them umpteen times until she really understood. Then she was ready for 9. I'm gonna guess that's the other program, just because I don't think their 6 and 7 is the 80 pages of writing that ours is. Be like, nope, once was enough. I got it. I'm moving on.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we do it that way, so you don't have to do it like 30 times. I don't know. But no, I don't know. It's interesting that we point out so frequently, and I've heard it so many times in meetings about 8 and 9. Oh, I got to be at the top of my list. I definitely harmed myself the most out there. It says that right in the literature. And then in the actual literature about 8 and 9, it kind of says you can put yourself on there, but that's not really the point of this. Like, the point of this is to deal with the way you feel about the others.
Yeah, and for me personally, I didn't put myself on the list. Not that I didn't think about myself, but I thought, man, look at all I've done in recovery. Like, I'm making amends to myself by doing this. That's all. That's all I need. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I needed all along.
Yeah. No, I think for me, I guess the only thing I would say, I do totally understand the amends to self from an inner child perspective. But that doesn't seem to fit in. Like, we don't talk about that in our program. Some other programs. Yeah,
it's like therapy, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think ACA, like Adult Children of Alcoholics, they do a lot of talking about inner child. And I believe we might have somebody from there coming on sometime in the next couple months.
Oh, nice.
But we don't really specifically mention that. And so I'd be hesitant to, pass that information on to others in our room. But
yeah.
But yeah, I could see from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense, right? That we do need to make those amends to that inner child. But yeah, just in the sense of our literature, it's interesting that so many people say it, even though in our literature it kind of says, it's not really the point of what we're doing here.
Right.
I don't know. So that was some of our wrap up from the last couple weeks. One of the things we wanted to get to tonight and just knock out of the way, because the presidential election is coming up, and I'm going to stay politically unbiased to the best of my ability. But, we do, even though it seems like from my internet searches, nobody really cares about the stances of the candidates. And if you don't believe me, try to find the stances of the candidates, because what I found was a whole lot of, Democratic primary stances between the different Democrats. And what it seems like is you're all tied into being Republican or all tied into being Democrat, and you're not allowed to have a stance outside of that box. Which was kind of shocking to me. It's like, I remember growing up and going to school, and we looked at the candidates' policies and ideas, and even if you were a Republican, you might, on this one issue, like you might be pro-choice or something. You might be outside the box on this 1 or 2 issues, but I guess that's just not the way it is anymore. And so what I found was their stances. I could not find drug policy specifically, but they did have a piece where it was talking about the opioid epidemic, which I figured tied pretty well in. And so Joe Biden, his stance says, the best way to tackle the opioid crisis is to make sure people have access to consistent health care, including insurance that covers addiction and mental health services. That's why I support protecting and building on the Affordable Care Act, which halved the rate of uninsured granite staters between 2013 and 2017, and allowed then-Governor Hassan to expand these healthcare services to over 55,000 granite staters through the Medicaid expansion. The Affordable Care Act also gave more than 60 million Americans access to more mental health and substance use disorder benefits and so-called parity protections, requiring insurers to treat mental health the same as physical health. In addition, I'll invest in expanding access to treatment for substance use disorder and hold criminally liable the pharmaceutical executives who peddled these drugs. Finally, instead of incarcerating someone for drug use alone, I will require federal courts to divert these individuals to drug courts so they receive treatment to address their substance use disorder, and I'll expand funding for federal, state, and local drug courts. So, the stance by Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential candidate, is that he wants to expand drug court treatment so that he's not locking people up for drugs alone. I guess that means that, if they do other crimes, they would have to do the time for that. But he wants to get people treatment. He wants to make sure people have access to health care so that they can get into treatment. He wants to make sure that insurance companies provide access to mental health, just like they would for physical health. He wants to hold responsible all the people who peddled the Oxycontins and stuff like that. So that sounds like something I like. President Trump, who is also a presidential candidate coming up, did not give a stance on this issue at all. I guess, me personally, I would glean that since he believes himself to be the law and order president, which is what I hear a lot, and he wants to kind of, quelch the riots with higher levels of violence, I guess. I'm not sure. I would assume that would be more of like a 1980s Ronald Reagan, zero tolerance kind of policy on drug use. I don't know. Any thoughts about that at all, or?
Yeah, and while we're talking, I was sitting here trying to look up Trump and what his opioid, addiction treatment plan is, and I couldn't really find anything either. I mean, this gets back a little bit into the racial stuff as well, but I think the criminal reform part is a huge aspect of, the drug problem as well. I mean, we trap people into a cycle once you lock them up for possession or, put that stain on their record. I myself fell into that. I was a good student. I was a, well-educated young man, but once I started getting a couple of felonies on my record, and they were felonies for possessions. I wasn't out, like, robbing places and getting caught with drugs or committing violence or harm to others. Although I guess you could say I was, drinking and driving, which that could cause a harm.
Right.
It's definitely dangerous. But, my possessions and stuff were all possessions and stuff. I wasn't a drug dealer. I wasn't a overt criminal, supporting a drug habit. But once I had those things on my record, I don't want to say it made it impossible, but it definitely hampered, my ability to get into college, my ability to do a couple other things. I know you've had similar, experiences with, once you get that stuff on your record, it's like, fuck,
Yeah.
And I think we see that happen in a lot of these. It's like the vicious cycle of there's a lot of drugs in poor and black and minority communities. We see it in poor white communities as well. So obviously that's where the cops are going to go look for the drugs. So they're going to go into those neighborhoods, shake down those people, find the ones that have any kind of drugs on them. Most of the time it's small amounts of drugs, but it doesn't matter. It's drugs, so you're going to get charged. And, then you're in the system and you're in the cycle. And it's hard to break that.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest problems when I was younger was getting money to get more. And I took 2 checks out of a checkbook, $45 each, wrote them out to myself and cashed them. And because of that, I've been, had to have extra interviews to prove that I was like worthy to get into college, like just to have an education. I'm definitely limited in the ability to like get certain jobs. I've been turned down to help inner city youth learn to read, like all
Right.
these crazy things. And, my thing is like, I'd love to advocate for mandatory, expungement of all records after a certain amount of time. Like, look, you've done your time. Oh, you went 10 years and didn't have any more problems? Your record disappears. Like, that's the kind of the point, right? If you haven't gotten in trouble again, you should be done with it. And I think that would help a lot of people in our community and the recovery community, just to have all that stuff kind of wash away after they've spent enough time doing the right thing. But yeah, I would say, look, wherever you stand on the next election, whatever candidate you support or have reason to support, like, I don't know. I guess the weird thing to me in looking up these issues and where people stand on policies was that there wasn't much policy conversation, and that felt strange to me because I thought we elected the president based on what they stood for and what their plan was moving forward. And so I don't know. I guess, people just back people by name now or just by party or whatever it may be. But whatever you're planning on doing, if you're planning on voting, take into consideration that if you are in the recovery community and believe in, helping the recovery community, where people stand on those kind of things. So
yeah. Well, and unfortunately, I think just a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, like the opioid crisis and the addiction crisis were like way at the top of the list of important things, and there was a lot of conversations about it. Mm-hmm. Now with COVID, with all the racial violence and the racial issues going on,
right?
A lot of the climate issues. We have these terrible fires and natural disasters happening. It's like women and gay rights, like, and all of these things are important. I don't mean to sound like one's more important than the other, but it's like there's so many of these things that are being thrown to the forefront. It's like the addiction one seems to have sunk down kind of lower on the list of what you hear on the news or what anyone's talking about,
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say for good reason, but for understandable reason at least. It's not the top priority going on in the world right now. But anyway, I just thought it would be responsible for us to talk about that and where people stood on issues that matter to us and to our hearts. And so vote with the issues that matter to you and what's important to you. So moving on, I'm on a Facebook group that I think you put me on to, Mike and Chris's cool NA history page.
Yep,
something like
about
that.
it.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just, scrolling through Facebook the other day, happy, joyous, and free, minding my own business. And there's a post on there. It's like, look at this garbage that World Service just printed, right? IP number 30. And I was like, oh, controversy. I got to check it out. And so I looked it up. It's called IP number 30, Mental Health and Recovery, right? And like the first 10 comments under the post were all like really bashing it. And man, they'll accept anybody. They'll let people do anything in NA anymore. All this stuff, right? And I read it. And I was expecting this like crazy new information and nothing. Like it's pretty much the same information. We already have a pamphlet called In Times of Illness that I've read before. And it doesn't really say anything outside of that. It's very bland and vanilla and generic. And I was like, did these people read this pamphlet or did they just bash it because it exists or what? And so there's like right now 151 comments on this. There's all kind of hatred and arguing about this pamphlet. And so I thought we would talk about it just a little bit. I know there's not really much in it to talk about. What was your take on reading it?
Well, first, I thought when you mentioned that page, I believe when I told you about that page, it was a good place to find controversy and things because you typically have a lot of like really old school, traditional, I don't know what you want to call it, not in favor of the current service structure people.
Right.
That it's almost like the people that are against big government. It's the same thing. Like they look at world service and the current service structure as some sort of big government that's taken power away from the groups and the individuals in Narcotics Anonymous. And typically, we've always been explained that the way this 12-step fellowship works is that it's directed by or driven by the groups and the individuals sort of drive the direction of the service structure. And at times it feels like that's not what's happening. And I think it's just we've become a worldwide fellowship. There's so many people that it's sort of difficult to get the opinion of a couple of million people and difficult to get everyone's take on any one individual issue.
I gotta say, I really, with the fucking smartphones, I just don't think it's that difficult. I don't get it. It's kind of like we still do a representative democracy. And I'm like, everybody's got a fucking phone, man. We could have an app and all vote directly on everything.
You could, but here's a let's just say a for sake of argument. Let's say, everyone that's in the 12-step fellowship, which not everyone would, but let's say, all right, World Service says, put your email into our database. We'll send you questionnaires and surveys on when we're going to do stuff to get your input.
Right.
If you got a questionnaire that had 10 questions on it, you had to do more than 8 seconds worth of reading, in a text one day, would you look at it and go, fuck, I ain't got time for this, and chuck it aside if it came from World Service, or would you fill it out?
I'm probably doing it because I know very few people are, and my opinion's going to matter.
Right. But that's what I mean. But already that
right.
A lot of people are going to get that, and they're going to look at it and go, I'll do it later. I don't have time. It's more than 3 seconds of reading, so I'm done.
Well, those are the people we get to tell later that they don't get to bitch because they didn't take the time to do it.
And, it's the more people you get involved, the harder it is to get everyone's opinion. And then The truth is, some people's opinion's not going to be the popular opinion, and they're still going to feel like their voice wasn't heard because you didn't do it their way.
Right.
Now, with all that being said, I read through that IP as well, and I mean, there was nothing in there that was shocking. It was, if anything, it was like refreshing to hear, like, hey, mental illness is a real thing that people struggle with. I tend to think having an old school sponsor at one time, like there was this attitude, and he had expressed this a couple times, although he was sensitive to mental illness stuff because he had a parent that was mentally ill.
Right.
And he would distinguish the difference in kind of a funny way, but he would say, like, yeah, when I came into recovery, like, yeah, I was depressed and suicidal and all these things. My life was shit. I was living under a bridge. You know what I mean? Like, I had no reason to, have self-worth. I had no reason to be proud of the person that I was. Like, of course I was depressed. But I got in recovery, started working steps, started fixing my life, and things got better. And I think there's a general attitude that a lot of our mental health and mental issues just stem from addiction and drugs, and that if we just stop that stuff, it'll get better. I don't know that I agree with that nowadays. I think we're much more educated on, trauma and, PTSD and how that affects different areas of people's lives. There's lots of different treatment options for those things, whether it's medication or different types of therapies.
I would say, if anything, I'm almost the other way around. It's almost like the drug use is the second to all these other things going on first.
Right.
Like, that's the treatment for what we already have.
But I think, and you see this not just from the recovery world, but from society in general. It's like, all this mental health bullshit's just a bunch of pussies, you know what I mean? Or a bunch of wimps, And we have a soft generation now. Like, they can't take anything. And it's like, there was this old school thing that, we have, truthfully, a bunch of people running around with untreated mental illness, is what it boils down to. And, Sylvia had mentioned, like, in the black community, like, it's almost like you just take that person and you shove them in a room somewhere, and that's just crazy Uncle Al or whatever, and, whether he actually goes to get therapy or medication or whatever is a side note, as to you just get used to dealing with a crazy person.
I think that was actually the post on the page was whatever happened to Clean and Crazy. As in, like, we should look back to that as a great time in our life.
That was a good thing.
To being clean and crazy. We should all be that way. Yeah, I agree. I remember when I had first initially gotten clean, I actually had to get on an antidepressant. I guess I don't have to. I could have went back to using, right? But that was pretty much my alternatives. I got to that point where it was like, I'm going to get high again, or I got to fucking try something else, right? And I think the stance then, at least, that people projected that I picked up was that antidepressants were like a lifelong sentence to being linked to a pill. And I think we kind of understand now that sometimes you just take these things for a season of your life to get through a period. Like, it doesn't mean you need an antidepressant forever. It doesn't mean, your brain chemistry might be out of whack, but it might not be that way permanently. Like, I think we just used to say, it's always going to be out of whack, right? I'm going to have to take antidepressants forever because my brain chemistry just doesn't work. And that's not really the way I understand it now. Like, it might be over time. say I'm struggling to sit down and meditate, I'm struggling to sit still, I'm struggling to sleep at night, whatever it is, right? All these things add up and my life is miserable and I can't get it on track. And then I turn to drugs. Well, the alternative is if I can take this medicine that I need, whether that's an antidepressant or some other form of mental health medication, and then I can fall into a routine while I'm on that medicine of being able to meditate, of being able to get proper rest at night and go to bed on time, of doing these positives in my life. There might be a time when I can take that medicine out and those behaviors are already established and producing the right result, and I just don't need the medicine anymore. That's what I understand to be true now. I thought originally that like once you did it, you were just hooked for life because your brain's out of whack. It'll never be right again. And so I think for me, it's a lot different in that aspect. It's not a life sentence. And even if your sponsor was right that we might be a little depressed when we get here, maybe there's a way to help us through that point.
Right.
Like we don't need to be just, oh, fuck it, I want to hang myself for 6 months until I get better. Like we don't have to be there.
Right. And if we took some of that, if we got professional help, might that minimize our risk of relapse or minimize the amount of relapse, and exactly what you're describing has been my experience with my wife. I think she shares this pretty openly, so I guess it's okay to say. Like when I first met her, she was on a mental health medication. And over the course of, her life, our life together, some things have stabilized, a lot of things have changed in our life, and she's been able to come off, and she's not been on medications it's been probably over 10 years now, and hasn't had a need to go back. But that's something we've talked about, and like she's talked about with her sponsor, as like always being an option, of like, hey, look, I know I have a history of mental health issues. In the past, I've needed medication to treat it. Right now I seem to be okay, but here are some warning signs of if shit's gone bad, and then, maybe it's time to get back to a professional. But those are all decisions she made, with the help of like a professional mental health doctor, what do they call that? A psychiatrist. She sought outside help. This wasn't decisions that she made on her own.
Right.
These aren't things where she just decided one day, hey, I'm just going to stop taking all my mental health medications because, somebody in NA said I'm using. Like, no, it was she was seeing her professional and said, hey, this is what I think I want to do. And they said, okay, well, here's how we can do that safely. And here's a good approach to doing that. And that was, and then she stopped seeing that professional and, they said, hey, you seem like you're pretty good now. You seem like you're pretty stable. I don't really need to see you anymore. If you feel a need to see me, call or make an appointment or come back or whatever. But for now, you're good. And again, that was, seeking professional help outside of the program for an outside issue.
Right. So let's go ahead and take our break real quick, and then we'll come back and jump right back into this. Here we are. We're back, and you had made a good point, Billy, about people with this pamphlet possibly being more open to seeking this mental health treatment. We said that maybe they don't need to be depressed for those first 6 months to a year, even though that is what we feel, and that is where our life is at. Maybe that's a thing that's going to lead us back to that shame and guilt and feeling terrible and using all over again, right? And I think that's a super valid point, that we can involve these professionals, and whether that be therapy or ultimately in the long run, some kind of medication that we need for our mental health conditions. But generally, I've been to a lot of meetings. I've heard a lot of people share their story. I don't ever remember somebody saying, I used over nothing, right? There's always these things going on, right? Whether that's some one individual trauma that occurred to them in their life, when they were younger, or whether that's just a series of feelings like something's wrong in their thinking or whatever. Like, recovery is an active change in our attitudes and ideals. And I think professional help through therapy can help with that. Not that a 12-step program can't also help with it. I think they work great in conjunction, right? I'm not saying everybody needs both of them. But yeah, like if people aren't using over absolutely nothing, and they do have reasons why they use, and yes, the steps slowly but surely as we work them do address these issues, to an extent, at least, to the best of their ability, right? Like, why would it be a terrible thing to have people possibly relapsing less often or at less risk to relapse when they're with professionals dealing with this early on?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the, I'm going to call it argument for, I guess now they're using the word induction or MATs, medicated assisted treatment for addiction, is, that can be just a bridge to help stabilize somebody through that really hard, coming off the streets, trying to get their lives together, getting through, whatever withdrawal or emotional, whatever. I mean, obviously, if you've been on drugs for years, I mean, your brain chemistry is all out of whack. It's going to take some time to start kind of working through that. And if you're working with a recovery professional or a counseling service or whatever, then, being open to these other kinds of treatment until you can get stable, get into whatever better mental health position to deal with some of the traumas and issues that you have.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, like we said, most of this information, or if not all of this information, is really not unique to now, right? We have another pamphlet. It's much longer. Maybe that's why they wrote this, because it's way shorter and people might actually read it, but it's called In Times of Illness. It says pretty much the exact same thing. It talks about if you need to take prescription medication prescribed by a professional at any certain point in time. It's more, I think, physical illness focused, I would imagine, than this where it's mental health focused. But I think it's got pieces in it that talk about the mental health aspect as well. I think the only real difference I picked up on, besides the length, obviously, the other book is ridiculous and you won't read it unless you're bored and dorky, like some of us. But the other book is more, it has the tone of, hey, reader, this is going to be uncomfortable for you. People are going to judge you in recovery for having to take these prescribed medications for whatever amount of time you need to. But you being clean is really up to you and your sponsor, and have, take heart in the fact that we stand with you. And it seems like this newer pamphlet is less addressed to the individual, and the tone is more, listen here, fellowship. Right. Accept these people who need to take these medications. Stop telling them not to. You're not a professional in our rooms. You are just a guy who has the last initial and calls himself an addict. Let them do what they need to do and prosper. And so I think that's an interesting thing that we kind of wrote. And it doesn't specifically say it like that. That's completely me. But that's the tone I get from it, is that it's more to everyone instead of just the person that needs to take it, telling them that they're going to face backlash and it'll be okay. And I don't know, I guess in one, it's good. I like it, but I also think from a fellowship standpoint, like, that's strange. That's strange that we're speaking to the fellowship and telling them to chill the fuck out about their diagnosis or just, feelings about medication. Yeah,
and I mean, I've heard this criticism, obviously, again, from some old school members, and you hear it, when you hit enough meetings, when I was new, they said, come in, sit down, shut up. If you want to know how to use, we'll ask you, and stuff like that. And we don't hear that anymore, other than people that say it like that. Right. It's like, but, when new people come in, that's not the kind of shit that they say, that you typically say, or that I say. I don't know what other people say. I don't say it, and I don't hear a lot of people say that directly to a lot of new people. We have sort of toned it down to be easier, softer NA these days. And there was a part of me at one point that didn't necessarily see that as a strength, that thought it was a weakness. And now I kind of see it the other way. It's like when we can approach people with like compassion and understanding and all these principles that are outlined in our steps, it's like love and empathy and, willingness and tolerance and patience, when we can approach new people with all of those things, or even using addicts with those attitudes, generally that's, I would say a more higher power driven approach than saying, sit down, shut up, if we want to know how to use, we'll ask you.
Right, right. Yeah, sit down, shut the fuck up, take the cotton out of your ears, put it in your mouth, and if we want to know where to cop, we'll ask you where the good shit is.
And there was just, what you said, there was one line in here that I love, because in the times of illness, like, it's never what I would say, like, directly clear that if you take medication prescribed by a doctor you're not using, like, they don't actually say those words.
Right.
But in this one, they do. Like, there's actually a line in there that says, members who take mental health medications as prescribed by a healthcare professional are considered clean. So it says pretty directly in there that that's the case. I mean,
yeah,
I don't always know how that piece of literature can take the stance for the whole fellowship. I mean, I guess they can, but
especially when there is like no actual, version of being clean in any of our literature, right. Really. Like, it never says this is specifically exactly what clean is, right? Like, coffee's acceptable, cigarettes are cool, no heroin, right? Like, that's not listed anywhere. It's always, your clean time is for you, it's between you and your sponsor, like, we don't make the decision about whether steroids get you high or not. Like, it's so strange to me that this piece all of a sudden decided to take a stance out of nowhere. Just fuck it. I'm going to hit him with it. You're clean.
You're right.
It's really interesting. I agree with you. So I hear people share about the old timers and how rugged it was when they got here. And nobody ever really says, that's exactly what I needed when I got here, right? They just say it worked. It's like, I managed to stay clean anyway, even in spite of these jerks at NA, right? Like, nobody says, man, that's just what I needed when I walked in the door. Somebody to tell me to sit down and shut the fuck up. Like, that's what we encounter our whole lives, is people telling us what the fuck to do. And it ain't worked yet, right? The judge couldn't tell me what to do. My parents couldn't get me straight by telling me what to do. Like, probation officers, whatever. That never worked. Right? I think the thing that I always hear people say that works is, man, I came in and I got this loving fucking hug from somebody, right? And they had empathy and they really understood where I was at because they had been there one time too. And like, so I get it. We are changing. I don't know if it's easier, softer, whatever you want to call it. I think that's maybe a view that I've had at another point in time in my life when things were either macho or not macho, right? That was the only two classifications of how shit worked. It's either it's hardcore or it's stupid, right? And it's like, maybe we've just learned. Like, we've learned that the thing that we're missing in addiction is contact and connection with people and empathy. Like, those are things we don't get, and maybe being showered with that can help us. I don't think it's like a softer, enabling version of our message. I just think we're adapting and learning, just like we know way more about mental health than we did in 1980, which is why we needed, information about mental health to say, hey, shut the fuck up. Stop telling people not to take their mental health medication because they might stab you tonight.
Right. And just to kind of piggyback off, Sylvia last week saying, like, we're this society in a society. Like, we are, and we have lots of different cultures and lots of different backgrounds, and we all come from different places, and there are certain cultures, whether they're ethnic or whether they're military or whatever, where that, like, tough, rugged, macho, like, is a huge part of their culture. So, obviously it's going to be more difficult for someone from that type of culture to come in and admit, like, hey, I have a mental illness, and I struggle with the voices in my head, or whatever. And, hopefully we can be a place that people feel comfortable to come in and talk about those things.
Yeah, so I guess the only holdup or hang up or issue or even question for me that arises out of this pamphlet, right? It says, if you're taking prescribed mental health medication, you're clean, right? We now classify DSM-5, that's the book, the handbook for all therapists everywhere to diagnose any mental health issues. They classify substance use disorder as it's a mental health dilemma, right? It's a mental health problem. And so if you go to see a licensed therapist and they recommend to treat your mental health problem of substance use disorder that you take Suboxone, or I guess methadone. I don't know. That's more of like a drug replacement. Suboxone's more of I don't know. So you're taking prescribed medication for a mental health issue. Suboxone. But we'll tell you you're not clean. And I believe to an extent you're not NA clean, whatever the fuck that means, right? So does this bring that into controversy? Does this make it questionable? Like, does this say, oh, well, you're treating a mental health issue as prescribed by a doctor, so you're clean?
Yeah, so for me, the way I understood, the difference, the point of clarity would be Narcotics Anonymous, the 12 steps and the program are treatment for addiction. We're not using a separate drug to treat addiction, and as far as I understand, like Suboxone or methadone or a drug replacement therapy is trying to treat your addiction with a substance.
Right.
We have a program to deal with addiction. We don't have a program that deals with other mental health issues, chemical imbalances,
right.
Things like that. So a chemical to treat a different mental health issue other than specifically addiction, is okay. That's the way I would clarify it for myself anyway.
Right. And that makes total sense, right? So you can have mental health issues treated by medication, but not the mental health issue that we're in the program for. Just not that one specifically. You can't have substance use disorder or addiction, as we call it, treated by medication, but any other mental health that we don't specifically treat, see a professional and take their suggestion on that. That's cool, but that definitely does not say that in this pamphlet. It doesn't say if you're being treated for mental health issues that aren't addiction, you're clean. Like, it completely specifies it. I mean, honestly, I would say, on a technicality.
So while I was looking for this new IP that came out, the one in the mental illness, I came across one that I had never seen before that was released from our world board. It's called Narcotics Anonymous and Persons Receiving Medication-Assisted Treatment. And then there's a sort of little, whatever you want to call it, disclaimer on this pamphlet that says, this pamphlet is intended for professionals who prescribe medication to treat drug addiction. The service pamphlet, NA Groups and Medication, listed below, contains a broader discussion of NA members and other medications. So this is, I guess, more of a PR type thing that we would put out to treatment providers and things.
Right.
But in this pamphlet, again, it's addressed towards people that are prescribing Suboxone or methadone or whatnot. One of the sections in here says, by definition, medically assisted therapy indicates that medication is being given to people to treat addiction. In NA, addiction is treated by abstinence and through application of the spiritual principles contained in the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous.
And so that kind of encompasses what you had said about, we can use mental health medication as long as it's not in the treatment of addiction itself or substance use disorder, it's just an interesting little, how do you say that, right? How do you say you can use mental health medications, all of them except this one?
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. And then, even you kind of move into some really, really iffy territory there, because Xanax is a prescribed mental health medication, and that is definitely something that I would have used if I had access to it.
Well, and it does outline, though, in some of those, in different areas in both of those pamphlets, that it is also, you should be taking it as prescribed. I think anytime you start in the mental illness IP, it definitely talks about, it's important that you take it under the direction of a professional and that you take it as prescribed. Like, we shouldn't be self-prescribing medications. That's where it gets.
Yeah, even so, though, I can't imagine somebody giving me Xanax, even if I took it as prescribed. It probably, I don't know, I just see it being an iffy territory of whether I'm clean or not, right? Like, I don't know. And of course, I'm not the person who needs it, so I'm not trying to criticize anyone who does require Xanax for whatever mental health condition they have. Again, that's what this pamphlet says. That's left to the professionals, not to, Jason on the fucking podcast, for sure. But it does create an interesting area, right? Where I don't know. I mean, I guess people are going to find a way to justify what they want to justify if that's what they're doing. And if they're just following mental health protocol and professional suggestions, then they're just going to do that.
Yeah, and it gets back to something I know we talked about this on a few episodes back about, again, what is actually clean, Right. We're allowed to have nicotine, we're allowed to have caffeine, What about the guy that's taking the steroids because he wants big muscles, or HGH or right. whatever, or maybe he's just hopped up on a ton of, over-the-counter shit from, GNC or whatever, is right. that clean?
What about Adderall?
Right. So I think there is always going to be a level of self-honesty and self-awareness. And the other part of it is I know I like to get defensive about what clean is and what clean isn't because it's so important to me. But the truth is, if you go out and get high tomorrow and then come back and say that you're clean, it really doesn't hurt me in any way. You know what I mean? It really doesn't matter that much for my personal recovery, my personal spirit. It might hurt my ego because, that term has powerful meaning for me and you're abusing it or whatever.
Right.
But the truth is, the dishonesty, if people are trying to, get around some sort of being clean, it only hurts them. I mean...
So why do we hold so tightly to that, moniker of being clean and defend it so deeply? Like, is it because we feel like we put in so much work and have gone without and have sacrificed that if you haven't, you don't deserve to use the word? Or
yeah, I mean, not to be too vulgar, but it was fucking hard to get here. You know what I mean? It took a lot of effort.
It wasn't easy. After all this time, now we're not going to be too vulgar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, it was a challenge.
Right.
And it was hard. And it's not if it was easy, a lot more people would stay clean.
I guess that's like somebody that has a master's degree and then somebody else coming along and saying they're a professional in that arena or something that doesn't. They've gone to, no college at all. They, took an online health class or something. Right. And they're like, wait a minute. You can't call yourself that. I get that.
And I think that's why people get defensive about other recovery modalities, too. It's like we hold what we're doing in such high regard, because obviously it's the only right way, Right. It's almost like religions. Like, well, we got the right one. You guys are doing some other bastard thing over there,
I was trying to think if AA had a similar dilemma. Like, they don't really have a Suboxone for alcohol type thing. Not that I'm aware of, at least. Maybe there is something and I just don't know about it. But I don't think they have a similar thing.
I wonder how they treat, like, non-alcoholic beer or whatever.
Very differing opinions. It's interesting. Right. I've always heard... So I remember hearing about this early on in my, program experience was my sponsor telling me, like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's using, basically. You might as well be. Like, what's the difference? Why are you drinking that at all anyway? And yet my... interactions with people online, there's a whole lot of people who enjoy mocktails and near beer and all this stuff and think it's fine and acceptable. And who am I to tell them it's not? Like, I'm like, my first reaction was, oh, you can't fucking do that, right? Like,
so funny enough, our sponsor, Voices of Hope, tomorrow night is doing a luau movie thing at their center, and they're going to have a bunch of mocktails there.
Oh, my God.
A bunch of Caribbean-style, non-alcoholic drinks.
They can't sponsor us anymore. I said I was all right with other people doing it, not me.
I can't encourage any of that nonsense.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, but it's, it's something people enjoy. I mean, I don't know.
It's definitely not the same as a Suboxone, though, from what I understand. Look, I don't know. I never took Suboxone. I never got high off of it. I've heard differing accounts of whether you really actually get anything from it. People do say there's something, but, it's not exactly like the other things. I mean, I guess AA has Antabuse, but that doesn't really do the same thing. I mean, we have Vivitrol that's kind of the same as that.
Yeah, well, and it's like methadone. I mean, you hear people that are on lower doses of methadone, and then you hear people that are on these ridiculous doses of methadone. And, that's based on the individual and what they go in and tell the clinic that they need, and this isn't enough or this is too much.
Right.
And each person is going to be looking for something different. Some people want to be numb to life. It's just, that's how they feel. That's what they feel like they need to function. While as other people want the least amount of feeling, from the drug anyway. I know for myself, like, I was amazed. So I had a surgery and didn't have to take, I chose to take some pain medications. And I was amazed at how just taking as prescribed didn't, like, totally fuck me up like it did when I took, like, 7. Like, when I just took 1, I'm like, oh man, I'm not even nodding out. Like, what, this kind of sucks.
I got a burn bag.
Right, like, here I thought I was going to be able to, catch a buzz. And not that it didn't affect me. I mean, it obviously it affected me. But it wasn't, like being high, it didn't feel the same.
So what do we need to be more like if we don't want to hold on to this strong version of clean? Maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe we don't need to be so defensive about it. I mean, I don't think we want anybody obviously intoxicated in front of our meetings for newer members to see. Like, that's not a good example of, what it's like to live differently. But maybe for the most part, we could just let go of this. Like, is there a normal person version of that? Like, what do they hold on to that they let go of? Or I'm trying to think, like we talked about, people who have degrees or are high up in a field being offended by someone who's not and having an opinion. Like, I've seen that argument online, like, who are you to say that, right? Like, you don't even have a degree or whatever.
With chiropractics, you heard about that?
That could be one. I mean, like, I don't know. So I have a friend who's a runner and runs ultra marathons, right? She would never be offended if somebody goes out and runs a mile every 2 weeks, said they're a runner. She would be like, that's fucking awesome. You're a runner. Cool. Like, I run too. Like, she would never, it would never be about belittling or you're not a real runner unless you do this. But, like, why do we hold on to these things? Why can't it just be like, oh, cool, I'm clean too? Like, that's awesome. I'm glad you're doing it.
Huh, I don't know.
Ego.
Either. We're self-centered. The core of our disease is our self-centeredness.
So it might not be that she's a runner and that's why she's okay with it. She just might not have the ego piece about that.
Or the self-centered part.
There's probably some other runners out there like, you're not a fuck, you walk, motherfucker.
Well, I mean, at least, and maybe I'm wrong, but maybe like normal people walk around and they don't give a shit what you call yourself. You can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. What do I care? It doesn't affect me. But as an addict, we're so sensitive to how someone might think something about us because you said something. Like
yeah, I don't know. I think that's everybody.
Right. No, I think that's unique to us.
Do you think so? I don't know. Everybody I meet self-centered, but maybe I just think they're self-centered because I am.
Yeah. You think they all think like you.
Yeah, that's what it is. I'm so self-centered that I just assume they all think like me. That's the only lens I got to look through right now.
I like to think better of the world.
I know you do. I know. I was raised with a very pessimistic view of life. It's out to get me. Fuck everybody. I don't know. You got anything else about mental health medication? I will just say, for my final take on it, I didn't think it was all too polarizing to get 151 argumentative comments out of people, but what the hell?
Yeah, I didn't find anything overly exciting in the IP itself. I mean, they said some things that I totally agree with. Like, look, if you even think you have some mental health issues, go talk to a professional.
Right.
If you have a sponsor and you have a solid network in recovery, it's probably not harmful to go talk to a professional. If you're averse to medication, start with a therapist or a psychologist, and then they can help you decide whether you might have a mental disorder that needs medication or not,
And which is a beautiful statement, and I would one step further for anyone out there, 12-step fellowship or not, earthling or not, addict or not, whatever you consider yourself, if your life satisfaction is not high, go try, right? Like, if nothing else, you find out that that's not what's going to work for you, right? If nothing else, you've ruled out, all right, well, I don't have to worry about that bullshit anymore. That's not going to work. But, like, you might find that there's some power in that room as well. Just like we talk about, there's a crazy power going on in the rooms of our program. There's a power going on in the room of therapy, man, that just has the ability to help and transform some people. And so if you're not feeling like you're getting the most out of life, we have a limited time here and we're running the fuck out of it, right? So don't wait. Like, go seek out something and just see if there's something better for you.
Yeah, amen.
All right. With that, we'll be back next week. Enjoy your week. Everybody stay safe. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to share it with people you think might benefit from the conversation. Look us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to join the conversation also and share your ideas with us. We'd love to hear it.